All right, good morning, everyone. I apologize for having to cancel class this morning. I had a sick kiddos all night long. And that 6:30 a.m. wake up call came very early, and both my kids were not up, of course, for going to school. So I had to make the choice or make the decision to cancel class. But to keep us as on track as we can be, I am going to post this lecture for today. And then we will pick up where we left off here on Thursday. So I know originally we had an exam scheduled for Thursday. I'm going to go ahead and move that back to next Tuesday. So we will finish up all of chapter 5 and operant conditioning today, and then in person on Thursday, and you'll have your first exam on Tuesday. I believe it's the 22nd. Okay, so that's the plan. All right, let me share the PowerPoint. Okay, so I think we left off talking about John Watson. Now we've kind of talked about him before. He was the founder of behaviorism. He's also referred to as the father of modern behaviorism. He was heavily influenced by Ivan Pavlov's work. They overlapped quite a bit. So John Watson kind of came on the scene a little bit before Ivan Pavlov started coming out with all of his findings on classical conditioning at the time. And then John B. Watson kind of looked at all of that research and continued on with it, as you see in his classical conditioning experiment with little Albert, right? So he was kind of the start of behaviorism. It is not the same behavior analysis that we have today. It's changed quite a bit. But John Watson, when he first came on the scene, psychology was largely focused only on mental states, mental capacities, mental constructs that we couldn't really observe at all, right? So these are all things that are being studied in like a therapy session or things like that, or even just theories of things, right? These are theoretical underpinnings of psychology that really can't be observed or proved or disproven. So John Watson came on the scene and said, okay, we need to separate ourselves from psychology and what they were looking at the time. So we're only going to be, behaviorists, behavior modification. We're only going to address observable behavior, so behaviors that you can see. We're not going to look at things like emotions and feelings and thinking and things like that. Now, that's not the behavior analysis science that we have today, but that is kind of how it started in its early beginnings. Okay. Then we have Edward Thorndike. So he was another early researcher, and his main contribution to psychology is something called the law of effect. Okay. The law of effect states that a behavior that produces a favorable effect on the environment. Okay, so something positive or something good happens because of your behavior or as a result of your behavior, then you're more likely to repeat that behavior in the future. Okay, so this is the law of effect. If you behave and something good happens, you'll probably do that same behavior next time in the future. We talked about this in class, going to the vending machine and putting your money in to get a candy bar. Right? If you actually get that candy bar, you improve your environment, you now have the candy you want, you're more likely in the future to go back and go back to that vending machine when you want a candy bar. Okay, that's the law of effect. And he actually did a lot of experiments. His famous experiments were with puzzle boxes and using cats. Okay, so we'll kind of talk about what this looked like. So here's the puzzle box. Here's what the contraption kind of looked like. So we put the cat in there, and as you can see on the right-hand side, it's mesh, so the cat can see through, but can't get out, right? There's a trap door, and there is a string attached to the top of the trap door, and there's a little lever inside of the chamber that if the cat steps on it, it will pull the trap door up, and the cat will be able to get out of the cage, okay? So how this worked was Thorndike put a hungry cat essentially in this box and set a bowl of food just outside of the cage so that the cat couldn't reach it. Okay, so if they tried to reach through the cage, they couldn't get to the food. And when the cat appropriately stepped on the lever, of course, the trapdoor would open. So the first time that they put the cats in there, they kind of just wander around. They might sort of mess with the string or mess with the lever. They might try to stick their paw through the mesh part of the cage, but eventually they do figure out to step on that lever and get out and get the food. And then Thorndike takes the cat and puts them back in. Okay, and they do this over and over and over again. And what Thorndike was actually measuring is he's looking at something called latency, escape latency, which basically is how long does it take from when we put the animal in the box to when the animal can figure out how to get out? How long is that time period? How long does it take the cat to figure out how to get out of the box? So the first time he puts them in there, they take a really long time, right? But as he puts them in there more and more and more, the more times he puts them in there, the faster they figure it out, right? They go straight to that little lever, they step on it, and they get out the trap door. And so what Thorndike is demonstrating here is that at the beginning, and you can see this on the graph at the start, the time to escape is really high. It takes the cat a really long time to get out of the puzzle box. Make sure I keep an eye on my time so this isn't more than an hour. Okay. And sorry, I'm just going to set a quick timer so I don't just keep talking and go way over time. Okay. And then as the number of times increases that the cat is put in the box, you see that the time to escape goes down. Okay. So this is the law of effect being shown to you on a graph. It's essentially that from the cat's perspective in their environment, right, they engage in a behavior, which is stepping on a lever to open a trapdoor. This improves their environment, right? They can get out and they can get food. So because there's a positive change because of their behavior or as a result of their behavior, they're more likely to engage in that behavior again in the future. And they in fact do, and they do that behavior faster, right? It gets faster and faster and faster every single time they're put in the puzzle box. Okay, so that's the law of effect, and Thorndike investigated that. Another prominent figure is B.F. Skinner. So he was responsible for expanding the field of behaviorism that was originally described by John Watson. Okay, so John Watson kind of came first. He was the father of behaviorism, but then B.F. Skinner came on the scene and he expanded on it. And he said, look, we can look not only at observable behavior, but we can also consider thinking and feeling and emotion. So he really expanded on what John Watson was already looking at. So he gave us really the behavior analysis that we have today. He was also the first one to look at all of these different experiments that are being done. So you have to remember, so Pavlov's experiments are going on, John B. Watson sees these results, and Pavlov continues doing research. John B. Watson decides he's going to do his little Albert experiment. And then at the same time, you also have Thorndike investigating this thing called law of effect. So Skinner comes on the scene, he says, okay. And he looks at all this research and he goes, these are two different learning processes that are happening, okay? There's a respondent learning and there's an operant learning. So he looked at all of this research that is being done by Pavlov and Watson and by Thorndike, and he said, okay, the stuff that's happening with Pavlov and with Watson, okay, with the salivation with the dogs or the startle response with the child to the loud noise, right? Those are reflexive responses. You're born, again, remember, these are unconditioned things, right? They're things that you're born knowing how to do. You have these responses. No one has to teach them to you. And then he looked at Thorndike's work, Thorndike's experiment. He said, now that is different. A cat isn't born knowing that when they're put in this puzzle box, they should step on a lever and open the door. They have to learn how to do that. They sort of have to figure it out, right? That is different than the behaviors that are occurring over here in this respondent conditioning situation. So Skinner was really the first one to look at all of it and say, wait a minute, these are two totally different types of learning that are happening here. And he did lots of experiments on these things with rats and pigeons. And he was, so he would have rats in a chamber. I believe I showed you guys a video of our rat and training it, but so Skinner was the one. They're called Skinner boxes because he was the one that came up with those. And there's a lever that the rat can press to get water, right? So he did a number of experiments looking at learned behaviors and teaching the rat to press the lever to get water, right? So pressing the lever for a rat is a learned behavior. A rat isn't born knowing how to press a lever in a Skinner box. Right. He also did a lot of experiments with pigeons where there was like a little light key. So pigeons will peck things that light up. So in the experimental chamber, there's a key and it lights up and the pigeon pecks it. Okay. And he did a number of experiments with pigeons and teaching them, patterns of what to peck or which shapes to peck and so on and so forth. Pigeons have actually been used in a lot of experiments to do crazy learned behaviors. I cannot think of who did this experiment, but there is an experiment out there with pigeons that the pigeons actually learned how to distinguish between different types of art. So impressionist art versus abstract art. So they were shown multiple paintings of like Picasso and Van Gogh and Monet and all these different artists. And the pigeons actually learned how to distinguish between one type of art and a different type of art, such that when they were shown brand new pictures that they'd never seen before, they could accurately pick which one was an impressionist versus which one was an abstract painting. Amazing. And all done with teaching them to peck keys and look at certain features and things like that. So lots of studies have been done on this operant learning process. And a lot of Skinner's work, a lot of the basic and important properties of behavior analysis that we have today and that we use in the clinical world, all of those things are coming from Skinner's experiments with pigeons and rats, really. Those basic principle experiments that were being done, that has formed a lot of the science that we have today on behavior. So Skinner defined operant behavior, like I mentioned before, separate from the respondent behavior that you engage in that no one has to teach you, right? So he looks at the operant conditioning, which is what Thorndike was doing with the cats. Okay, that's operant conditioning because that's a learned behavior. The cats had to learn how to press the lever to get out of the box. So he defines this type of behavior, this operant behavior, right? The behavior you have to learn, in terms of a 3-term contingency, where there's an antecedent, okay, that's what happens right before the behavior occurs, then a behavior happens, and then a consequence happens. So something comes after the behavior. So what he's saying is, in the presence of a certain antecedent, in the presence of a certain stimulus, or in the presence of a certain person, or in the presence of a certain place, you engage in some behavior, or the animal emits a certain response that will be followed by a certain consequence. Depending on whether or not that consequence improves your environment or deproves, right, makes your environment worse, is going to determine the probability of which you will engage in that same behavior in the future. So again, think about the candy machine, right? The antecedent in that example is you standing in front of the candy machine, because think about it. The behavior, which is putting your money in and making your selection, only happens when you're in the presence of the candy machine. You don't walk around doing this with money just in the air, right? Or at a wall or at a door. You only engage in that behavior when you're standing in front of the candy machine, and then that behavior will occur. Okay, so that's what an antecedent is. It's a place, a stimulus, a person that could then result in your behavior. Okay, so with the candy machine, the antecedent is being in the presence or standing in front of the vending machine. Your behavior, putting the money in, making your selection. The consequence, you get your candy bar. Okay, now because it paid off, your environment improved, you have the candy you want, the probability of that behavior increases in the future, right? You're more likely to engage in that behavior, go to that same candy machine, or when you're in front of the candy machine, put your money in, make your selection. You're more likely to engage in that behavior in the future because it paid off. Okay, you improved your environment. Think about the example I gave last week when I talked about if you are just a short distance from your exit, but you're stuck in a lot of traffic. So you decide to pull over into the, I can never remember the name of it, but it's not a driving lane, right? But the lane where you pull over, like if you get an accident or you get a flat tire. So you just decide to pull over into that and use that as a lane to get to your exit, right? And then you get pulled over by a cop and you get a ticket. So let's talk about this example in terms of the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence. Okay, the antecedent in this example is you're stuck in traffic and you can see your exit. It's a short ways away. Okay, so you're in a place, if you can think about it that way. You're in traffic and you're close to your exit. That's the antecedent. Okay, so you're stuck, you're not moving, but you can see your exit. So what's your behavior? You pull out into a lane you're not supposed to drive in and you try driving to your exit to get there faster, right? But what's the consequence of that? What's the result of that behavior? A cop sees you, they pull you over, you get a ticket. Now, what's the probability of that behavior in the future? Well, it's probably much lower because your environment did not improve, right? You got a ticket, you got pulled over, you didn't get what you your behavior didn't pay off. You didn't get to your destination faster. You didn't take the exit, right? You got pulled over. So antecedent, sitting in traffic, you can see your exit. Behavior, you pull into the lane you're not supposed to, you drive. Consequence, you get a ticket. This makes your environment worse. It deproves your environment. So in the future, you're less likely to engage in that same behavior, right? The probability of that behavior decreases. Okay. These are just some review questions for you that I've put on here just for practice, but I'm not going to go through them. You can go through them on your own. And I'm going to pull up the next slideshow. Okay. So now we're going to talk about reinforcement and punishment, because these are the things, these are like sort of the specifics we get into when we're talking about improving your environment, right? When your behavior pays off versus when your behavior doesn't pay off and the consequence is a negative consequence. Okay, so your environment doesn't improve. So reinforcement and punishment, here we go. Okay, so the law of effect that was discovered and studied by Thorndike is something we called a temporal law. So it's events that happen close in temporal proximity, which all that means is they happen close together in time. Okay, there's short time periods between all of these things happening. So when you think about the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence, the time period between each of those things is very short. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we say it's a temporal law. You stand in front of the antecedent, that results in your behavior pretty quickly, right? Once you make your selection, like once you decide what you want, you put your money in, you make your selection, and then pretty quickly after that, your behavior is reinforced. The longer you have to wait, the less you're reinforced, right? If you're waiting and waiting and waiting, the candy is not coming out, or the little coil is turning, but nothing's moving forward, right? Then your behavior isn't reinforced. So all we're saying here is that there's a short period of time between your response or your behavior and the reinforcer, okay, the consequence. There has to be a short period of time there. Learning doesn't require that a response causes a reinforcer. Okay, so we're not saying that your behavior causes the candy to come out of the machine. When we talk about these things, it's not that your behavior causes something to happen in your environment. It actually doesn't, right? It's possible for that candy to not come out of the machine. Rather, what we're talking about here is that if you are reinforced close in time to the behavior, so there's a very short period of time between when you behave and you actually get a consequence that is positive, then learning will occur faster. So it's not a causal contingency in the sense that your behavior doesn't cause anything to happen. Rather, it's the reverse of that. The consequence that follows your behavior, whatever that is, and however closely it follows your behavior, will determine how likely it is you are, or maybe unlikely it is, that you'll behave the same way in the future, or that you'll engage in that behavior again. Okay. So first, let's talk about reinforcement. So first, we're going to define it, and then we'll kind of break it down and talk about it, okay? So there's a behavior that immediately results in a consequence. So again, it has to be a short period of time. It's a temporal law. These things have to happen very quickly for the most part. We'll talk about some exceptions, but for the most part. Because of this, because of that immediate consequence, the behavior is then strengthened or more likely to happen again in the future in similar circumstances. If the behavior does not increase in the future, you can't say that reinforcement has happened. Okay, that's the key there. You only know if it's reinforcement if we actually see the behavior increase in the future. So you can't say that reinforcement is a behavior happens and then a positive consequence follows. That's only part of reinforcement. We only know if it actually worked, if it actually was reinforcement, if we see the behavior increase later in the future. Then you can say definitively reinforcement has occurred. Now, why do we make this distinction? Because some people might consider something a positive consequence, but others might not. Let me think here. Okay. So, you know, some people like to, they engage in like all kinds of, what's the word I'm looking for? Extreme sports. Okay. Extreme sports. So you engage in this behavior, you go bungee jumping, right? You get this huge adrenaline rush. For if you are someone who likes extreme sports and you like experiencing the adrenaline rush, the excitement, kind of the nervousness, for you, that's a positive consequence. And in the future, you're more likely to continue engaging in extreme sports and trying new things and sort of pushing your boundaries, right? Because for you as an individual, that was a positive consequence of your behavior. The only reason we know that is because we can look at your behavior over time and see in the future and during other events, you continue to engage and participate in extreme sports. Okay. Someone else can go through the same experience. They do the exact same thing as you, so they behave the same way. They try an extreme sport. They go bungee jumping. They have the same consequence. They experience the adrenaline rush, the nervousness, maybe the excitement, the scariness of it all. But for them, that was not a positive consequence. Okay, they did not enjoy that experience. It actually was a negative experience that resulted in a deprovement of their environment. And we don't see them engage in that behavior in the future. Okay, so that's why you need that last component of whether or not the behavior actually increases in the future to know if it was a positive consequence or not. Because some people could look at the same consequence and it's positive for one, but not for another. So we have to look at future behavior as a predictor. So essentially, and I've already pretty much just said this, but reinforcement results in behavior increasing. If it worked, if it was actually reinforcement, the behavior increases in the future. If you don't have that component, reinforcement didn't happen. When we're talking about reinforcement, we say that we reinforce behavior. We do not reinforce people or animals, okay? You strengthen the behavior by reinforcing the behavior itself, not by strengthening a person, okay? So when we talk about these things, I reinforce my cat's sitting with a treat, okay? What am I doing? I reinforce the behavior of sitting with the consequence of a treat, okay? So I'm reinforcing the behavior, not I reinforced my cat for sitting. You don't reinforce the animal. You don't reinforce the cat. You don't strengthen the cat. You strengthen the sitting. You reinforce the sitting, okay? Your behavior of going to the vending machine was reinforced with a candy bar. We wouldn't say the candy bar reinforced you, or you were reinforced with a candy bar. This becomes really problematic in clinical settings, right? They'll say, Johnny was reinforced by the iPad, right? I reinforced Johnny for raising his hand with the iPad. No, you reinforced Johnny's raising his hand with the iPad. We reinforce his behavior, not the actual person, okay? So I might ask you something like this on the exam. I'll give you like an example of a phrase and ask you if this is correct or incorrect, right? So you'll have to be able to identify, are the terms being used correctly? So remember that we reinforce the behavior, we do not reinforce the person or the organism. We have two types of reinforcement. All right, so this can get a little confusing. I'll try to go slowly so everyone kind of sticks with me here. There's positive reinforcement and there's negative reinforcement. That does not mean good or bad, okay? So don't think about it as in positive or negative, because they both are reinforcement. So essentially, they're both good, right? So we can't think of, you have to sort of remove, that part of, in our language, right? Positive means good or, something great, and negative means something bad or something you don't want. But that's not how the terms are used here. And you'll see in a moment what I mean. So positive reinforcement, a behavior is followed by the presentation of a stimulus, the reinforcer, the consequence, and therefore the behavior is strengthened. The behavior happens more in the future, okay? It increases. So again, a behavior happens, it's followed by something being presented. Okay, something is added to your environment, and because of that, your behavior is strengthened in the future. Okay, a stimulus is just an object or event that can be detected by your senses. So that's what we mean when we say a stimulus. Okay, so something is presented to you. The positive reinforcer, sometimes we'll use that term. All we're saying is that's the stimulus that was presented after a behavior in positive reinforcement. It was the stimulus that was presented to you that strengthened your behavior or increased your behavior in the future. Oops. Okay, so let's talk about some examples here. And I have more examples in a couple slides, but let's stick with the vending machine example, okay, because we've used that. You guys are familiar with that example. That's an example of positive reinforcement. Why? Because a stimulus, a candy bar, is being added to your environment, right? There's a presentation of something into your environment because of your behavior, as a result of your behavior. So you go to the candy machine, you behave, stick your money in, choose your selection. As a result, there's a presentation of a stimulus, and that stimulus is a candy bar. As a result, your behavior increases in the future. That's positive reinforcement. Okay, something is presented to you. Now let's talk about negative reinforcement. Okay, here, a behavior is followed by the removal of a stimulus, and the behavior is still strengthened in the future. Okay, so see here, it's still reinforcement. Why? Because the behavior is still increasing in the future. But what's happening here is we're removing an aversive stimulus. Okay, so we're removing something that is unpleasant in your environment. And as a result of that, because we made your environment better, we took away the aversive stimulus. And as a result, the behavior that produced the aversive stimulus going away is reinforced, and it increases in the future. Let me give you an example. Okay. Escape or avoidance behaviors are what are associated with negative reinforcement. Okay, so let's say you're walking outside, you're walking to class, and it starts raining. This is an aversive stimulus, right? You're now walking in the cold, wet. Okay, so you have to engage in a behavior. You open an umbrella that you're carrying. And as a result, what's the consequence of that? You're no longer wet. The rain isn't hitting you anymore. Okay. And as a result, your behavior of opening the umbrella in the rain is strengthened in the future. We see that behavior increase in the future. Why? Because it removed the aversive stimulus of you being wet and the rain falling on you. Okay. Still reinforcement because that behavior of opening the umbrella increases in the future. So we know this is reinforcement. But this is reinforced because we removed something that was happening to you that was bad, right? We took it away. Let's say you have a headache. Okay, your head hurts, you're in pain. That's an aversive stimulus, right? It's something that you can sense. Remember, a stimulus is something that can be sensed, right? Smell, taste, touch, sight, hearing. So you have a headache. That's the aversive stimulus. So what's the behavior? You take an Advil or you take an Excedrin. What's the consequence of that? Well, if the medication works, the headache goes away. As a result, in the future, when you have a headache, you're more likely to take the Excedrin when you have a headache, right? That behavior increases in the future when you're in the same circumstance. So aversive stimulus is present, you have a headache. You engage in a behavior, you take the Excedrin, and as a consequence, that aversive stimulus, which is the headache, is taken away. It's removed from your environment, and as a result, your behavior is reinforced. Your behavior of taking Excedrin when you have a headache increases in the future. Okay, so that's escape. You can also avoidance is another one as well. So this is when you try to avoid the aversive stimulus altogether. There are lots of studies that have been done on this where I won't go in too much detail, but basically they ran these studies with rats. And what they did was the bottom of the chamber would emit a very low grade shock, but a shock, right? So it was uncomfortable on the rat's feet. But if they pushed a lever, it turned the shock off. So again, that's escape, right? There's an aversive stimulus in place. They're getting shocked on their feet. If they engage in the correct behavior, which is pressing the lever, the aversive stimulus is removed. Okay, that's negative reinforcement. The aversive stimulus is removed. As a result, the rat's behavior of pressing the lever increases. But what they actually found that the rats were doing were they were pushing the lever before the shock even happened to keep the shock from ever happening, to avoid the aversive stimulus altogether. So the rats would be put in the chamber, and before they could even turn the shock on, the rats were pressing the lever and just pressing the lever and pressing the lever to prevent the aversive stimulus from ever occurring. Okay, so now we're not talking about escape because the aversive stimulus isn't there. It's not present. It never happened. But the rat will still press the lever to keep it from happening, to avoid the aversive stimulus. A real life situation. Let's say you're walking down the hallway to class and you hear someone's voice that you don't particularly get along with. Right? And what do? You want to avoid them. That's an aversive stimulus. So you hear someone's voice that you don't get along with and you know, we butt heads. I don't want to talk to them. So what do? You engage in a behavior. You might take a different route. to wherever you're going, right? And you avoid that aversive stimulus altogether. You avoid seeing that person. You avoid the aversive stimulus. Your behavior of taking a different route is then strengthened, right? Especially if you take the same route and you hear that person a lot, you learn that person takes the same route as me. I'm going to take a different route from now on. And that behavior is strengthened in the future to avoid the aversive stimulus altogether. So negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement both result in behavior increasing in the future. But for positive reinforcement, something is presented to you after your behavior. In negative reinforcement, an aversive stimulus is removed. Here's some examples, and we'll kind of go through these. You push a power button on the TV remote, and the TV comes on. Okay, so blank TV, black screen, no visual stimuli. You push the button, that's your behavior. The TV turns on, that's the consequence. A stimulus is being presented to you. What kind of stimulus? A visual stimulus, right? It's visual stimulation. Now you have pictures and sound and all kinds of things on the TV that are available to you visually. So what is this an example of? Positive or negative reinforcement? Positive reinforcement, because a visual stimulus is being presented to you. There's a presentation of the stimulus. And in the future, your behavior of pushing the power button on the TV remote to turn on the TV increases, right? Positive reinforcement. So look at this one. You put on a coat on a cold day, and then you're not cold anymore. So let's think about this. Why do you put the coat on in the first place? Because you're cold, right? That's the aversive stimulus. You're cold, your body temperature is below what it should be, or the outside environment is cold, right? You feel it on your skin. That's an aversive stimulus. You engage in the behavior of putting your coat on, and the aversive stimulus is removed. You're not cold anymore. That's negative reinforcement, right? And in the future, when you're cold, the behavior of putting on a coat is increased. It happens more in the future because of negative reinforcement. You remove, because of that behavior, you remove the aversive stimulus. You slap a mosquito and you're no longer being bitten. Okay, let's think about this again. There is a mosquito biting you. You can feel it. You know, you get that little itchy pinch kind of feel. Okay. You engage in a behavior, you slap it, and then you're no longer being bitten. So think about that example. Okay. Something is being taken away, right? The aversive stimulus or feeling of the mosquito biting you is removed as a result of your behavior. And in the future, your behavior of slapping a mosquito when they're on your arm increases. Negative reinforcement. There's an aversive stimulus present. There's a mosquito biting you. You engage in a behavior, you slap the mosquito, and the aversive stimulus is removed. As a result, your behavior of slapping a mosquito increases in the future. This is negative reinforcement. You turn up the volume on your phone, and now you can hear better. Okay. Now think about this again. You got to think about the environment and what's happening in the environment. You can't hear anything. Okay. You've got your phone so quiet that you can't hear anything. You engage in a behavior, you turn the volume up, and now what? Now you can hear something. Okay. There's auditory stimuli coming in now that wasn't there before, right? Something has now been presented to your environment, okay? So there was no sound. You turn the volume up on your phone. That is the behavior. As a result, now there's auditory stimuli. Now you can hear better, okay? This is positive reinforcement, because some stimulus was presented to you, and as a result, it increases your behavior in the future. The next time you can't hear anything on your phone, you're more likely to turn the volume up, which produces the effect that you can hear better, or more auditory stimuli. Positive reinforcement. You close the window when it rains and no water gets in. Okay. Which means what? There was rain coming in, right? It's raining outside and your window is open and your windowsill or whatever's under the window is getting wet. That's an aversive stimulus. You engage in a behavior, you close the window, and as a result, no water gets in. In the future, when a window is open and it's raining, you're more likely to close it, right? Why? Because of negative reinforcement. The aversive stimulus of water coming in your window is removed as a result of your behavior of closing the window. That's negative reinforcement. You wear earplugs on a noisy job and you no longer hear the loud noise. Now look at this comparison. Compare this one to the example we had of the volume in the phone. Okay, the volume in the phone was positive reinforcement. There was no auditory stimuli. You turn the phone up. Now there's an auditory stimulus that is presented, right? Positive reinforcement. But look at this one. You wear earplugs on a noisy job and you don't hear the loud noise anymore. Something's being taken away, right? So what is that? It's the aversive stimulus of all the noise. It's really, really loud. You see a lot of people on construction sites who wear earplugs, or people who are DJs, right? Who work in loud clubs or even at concerts, right? Security guards and people who work the sound systems who work backstage will wear earplugs. Why? The job is really, really, really noisy, noisier than something normal that you would tolerate. Right? So that's an aversive stimulus. It's too loud. You engage in the behavior of putting earplugs in or wearing earplugs, and that aversive stimulus is removed. You no longer hear the noise. Negative reinforcement. As a result, the behavior of you wearing earplugs on a noisy job increases in the future. You turn on an exhaust fan over a stovetop and there's no more smoke. Okay. Again, something's being removed here, right? There was an aversive stimulus, there's smoke. You engage in a behavior, you turn on the exhaust fan. As a result, the smoke goes away. The aversive stimulus is removed. And in the future, when there's smoke in the kitchen, you're more likely to turn the exhaust fan on. This is negative reinforcement. You click the Explorer icon or the Google Chrome icon, you get on the internet. Okay, again, there was no internet. You click on the icon. Now you've opened the browser to get on the internet, right? A stimulus is being presented to you. Okay, so this is positive reinforcement. There's nothing there. You engage in a behavior, you click on the icon, and now a stimulus is presented, a visual stimulus, right? Now you see the internet, which opens up all kinds of stimuli that is available to you, right? Whatever you're searching or looking at, positive reinforcement. You turn off the alarm buzzer, and there's no more annoying sound. Again, something's being removed. There's no more annoying sound. So there is a really loud buzzer. There's an aversive stimulus in the morning when you wake up and you set your timer, right? And it's that, right? Depending on what alarm you have. That's what I have. That's the aversive stimulus. It wakes you up. You engage in the behavior of turning the alarm off, right? You click the off or stop, and the aversive stimulus is removed. There's no more annoying sound. In the future, when you hear the alarm buzzer on your phone, you're more likely to turn it off. Why? Because of negative reinforcement. It removes the aversive stimulus. All right, so hopefully all of those examples made sense to you guys and you can go over them yourselves, but I will have examples like this on the exam. There'll be 3 parts. So I'll actually say things like, there's your phone alarm is going off in the morning, you turn off the alarm buzzer, and now there's no more annoying alarm sound. Identify what process this is, right? Is it positive reinforcement or is it negative reinforcement, right? So you'll have to look at examples and you'll have to identify what they are, positive or negative reinforcement. Okay, so that's what it will look like on the exam. Okay, we've already kind of talked about this when we talked about classical conditioning, but I do want to go over these again. So unconditioned reinforcers are also referred to as primary reinforcers. Again, these hold some sort of biological importance, which means that nobody has to teach you how to respond to them. Oh, no, the slides aren't working. There we go. Okay. Examples of this are food, right? So we saw that in the experiment with the dogs. Water is another one. Oxygen. Warmth, so when you're really, really cold, warming your body up. Also, the flip side of that, when you're really, really hot, cooling your body down. Sexual stimulation, okay? Those are all primary or unlearned reinforcers. No one has to teach you those things. Okay. Now, I get a lot of questions about sexual stimulation. The way in which you engage in sexual stimulation, or the way in which you seek that out, right? Or the partners you choose, and so on and so forth, those are learned behaviors. However, the biological response you have is unlearned, right? Those things happen automatically, if that makes sense. When your genital area is stimulated, right? There are certain responses that your body engages in automatically. No one taught you how to do that. So that's what we mean when we say that sexual stimulation is a primary or unconditioned reinforcer. It's the stimulation part. Not all of the behaviors you learn to get that, right? But in and of itself, it's an unlearned reinforcer. There's no conditioning that has to take place to teach you those things, right? That's classical conditioning. And when you're in a state of deprivation of these things, they automatically reinforce whatever behavior came before it. So, for example, when you can't breathe, right, if you're choking, you'll engage in a number of behaviors to get whatever it is out that you're choking. Whatever behavior results in you being able to breathe again, okay, that might be like hitting your chest, that might be like pushing your stomach on something to shoot it out, whatever's stuck in your throat. That behavior automatically is reinforced because now you can breathe again, right? It's reinforced by the fact that you have oxygen again. Same thing if you're starving, right? If you're really, really hungry, whatever behavior then results in you actually getting the food. So for example, let's say you're sitting in class, you're really hungry, you're sitting next to your friend, they always have snacks. You might point to their backpack. You might say, hey, do you have anything to eat today? You might say, hey, can I have a piece of that? Whatever behavior actually results in your friend saying, oh, sure, here's the food. That's the behavior that is reinforced and will probably happen again in the future. So on the exam, you will need to be able to identify the primary reinforcers, okay, as opposed to learned or conditioned reinforcers. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that you do need to know the distinction between unconditioned or primary reinforcers and what those are, examples of those, and that there's no learning history needed, right? There's no prior experience needed. No one teaches you how to engage in those or how that those are reinforcing. Okay, no one teaches you that food is reinforcing or that oxygen is reinforcing, and so on and so forth. Then we have secondary or conditioned reinforcers. Okay, so now these are reinforcers that you learn. They become reinforcing because of their association with the primary reinforcer. So they're secondary or conditioned reinforcers. It's things, stimuli or events. It can be a person, it could be sound, it can be smell, but it's stimuli that are associated with a primary reinforcer. And because of that pairing, that becomes a reinforcer as well. a learning history is necessary whenever we're talking about conditioned reinforcers. The picture here is a clicker, right? When you're training a dog or any animal really, you use a clicker, trainers do. They pair this clicker, the sound of the click, with a treat. So every time they give the dog a treat, they also click the button. Over time with pairing, all you have to do to reinforce the dog's behavior is do a click. So you say sit and you click, and the dog, it's reinforcing to them because it's been paired with food in the past. And you don't have to give them a treat every single time they do something you ask them to do. You can say sit, click. You can say come, click. You can say speak, shake, roll over, and you can click every time for all of these multiple behaviors. And then at the very end, you can give them one treat rather than giving them a treat for every single behavior. Okay. After you've paired the treat with the clicker. So now the clicker is a conditioned reinforcer. Pretty much anything that you learn in your environment that you learn is reinforcing is a conditioned reinforcer. The Taco Bell sign is a conditioned reinforcer, right? Because it's been paired with food. The kitchen is a conditioned reinforcer. Again, it's been paired with making food or food being available to you, right? The open sign on a building is a conditioned reinforcer because it's given you access to something. There are, I mean, just endless, and pretty much any example you can think of is a conditioned reinforcer. The smell of things, the sound of things, and so on and so forth. Okay. In the clinical world, we use these. So we use token systems, right? So instead of having to reinforce every single behavior, we might say, okay, every time you engage in the correct behavior, we'll give you a token that you can then turn in for a toy, right? Or a treat, okay? So these tokens on this, the token board is like the little cars, right? So they have to earn a certain amount of cars, and then they earn access to playtime or access to a toy. So those tokens have been paired with the toy enough that we can use those as conditioned or secondary reinforcers to get the toy or to get playtime or activity. Okay. Activity or movement is actually a primary or unconditioned reinforcer, not necessarily the slinky toy in and of itself, but activity or movement is a primary reinforcer. And we pair the tokens with food. Sometimes we'll pair them with treats and things like that until we can just use the token alone. So that's how we use conditioned reinforcers in the clinical world when we're working with clients. I have some clients who I've had to pair myself as a conditioned reinforcer, right? So if they don't want to show up for appointments with me, I have to pair myself with a primary or unconditioned reinforcer, right? So I have a client who evades me a lot for his appointments. He doesn't like to show up for a number of reasons. He likes me, but he doesn't like what we do together in terms of his treatment and the behaviors I'm dealing with and trying to help him with. He doesn't like to see me to work on those. He just likes to see me to hang out. So what have I done? Every time he actually shows up for his appointment and I don't have to chase him all around town looking for him, I take him to lunch, right? So I'm pairing myself with a primary reinforcer of food, typically his favorite food, wherever he wants to go, which is usually Jack in the Box. So I'm become a conditioned reinforcer. So now when he sees me, that is reinforcing because I paired myself with another primary reinforcer. Okay, so it can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a token, it can be a smell, it can be the sight of something. Okay. Lots of things are conditioned or secondary reinforcers. We talked about extinction a little bit already. So a previously reinforcing behavior or previously reinforced behavior is no longer followed by the reinforcing consequence, and as a result, the behavior is weakened. It's the same extinction example we gave when we talked about classical conditioning and breaking the pairing For the dogs, it was break the pairing of the bell and the food, right? Extinction. You present the conditioned stimulus over and over and over and over again without presenting the unconditioned stimulus, right? You present the bell over and over again to the dogs without giving them food. This is the same idea. So a behavior that was previously reinforced isn't reinforced anymore. It's no longer followed by the reinforcing consequence. What would that look like? It would be if you went to the same vending machine every day, got your candy bar, and you always got your candy bar, right? That behavior is reinforced. So you always go back to that machine and you get your candy. Okay. Extinction would be you go back to that machine again, and this time no candy comes out. No reinforcing consequence there. You didn't get your candy. You go back again. Again, you don't get your candy. You might try one more time, a third day. You don't get your candy. As a result, because that behavior isn't being reinforced anymore, the behavior weakens and stops occurring in the future. You stop going to that vending machine because it doesn't reinforce your behavior anymore. You no longer receive the candy bar. That's extinction. Okay, it's the same idea that we talked about with classical conditioning. It's just here, your behavior is no longer being reinforced. So you stop engaging in it. There are some general principles of extinction in terms of how resistant they are to, like, how fast it will go down. Okay, if behaviors have been reinforced every single time, which is continuous reinforcement, so every time that behavior occurred, you always were reinforced for it in the same way. Every single time you went to that vending machine, your behavior was always reinforced. It never messed up. That's usually doesn't happen. Usually a vending machine messes up once or twice. But let's say, for example's sake, that every time you went to this one particular vending machine in Brighton Hall, that one always works, and it's never out of the drink that you want, right? You know how you push the button, it'll say, you know, all out or empty or whatever. It always has the drink you want, and it always works every single time. That's continuous reinforcement. It happens every time. If you go to that machine one day and it doesn't work, extinction of your behavior goes down pretty quickly because you've always been reinforced for that in the past. Okay. Whereas behaviors that have been intermittently or occasionally reinforced actually they're not extinguished as quickly. They don't go down as fast. A great example of this is watching people at slot machines. Okay. Those behaviors are intermittently reinforced. Occasionally you win. Occasionally you hit it big, right? And your behavior of sitting at the slot machine for however long it took and pulling the lever and putting your money in is reinforced. But because the reinforcement of that behavior is unpredictable, it's intermittent, it doesn't happen every time, it's actually more resistant to extinction, which is why you see people sitting at a casino for hours on end, even though most of their behaviors are not reinforced. Think about it. Most of the time, they don't win. Most of the time, they don't hit the jackpot. They're actually losing money, but they don't stop, right? That behavior is really resistant to extinction because it's been intermittently or occasionally reinforced. Okay, so the graph looks like this here. Sorry, this is not the graph of that. It's something else. So extinction will go down really fast when a behavior has been reinforced every time. Extinction will kind of go slow or maybe not even at all if the behavior is intermittently reinforced. Okay. We see this with rats a lot. We've done experiments with this, and we do this at Sac State in the rat lab. If you teach a rat to press the lever to get water, okay, so the way it works is they press the lever and we click a little dipper and the dipper comes up with water and they can drink water. So they press the lever, they drink water. They press the lever, they drink water. That's continuous reinforcement. Every time they press the lever, they get water, every single time. The moment they press the lever and we stop reinforcing, their behavior extinguishes pretty quickly. They're going to press it a few times, but then they're going to stop within a minute or two. Why? Because every single one of those behaviors was reinforced before. Now they're not being reinforced anymore, so the rat stops behaving. But a rat who maybe only every third time they press the lever is reinforced. Okay, so they press the lever, no water. They press the lever a second time, no water. They press the lever a third time, and now they get water. And we do that over and over and over again so that only every third behavior is reinforced. When we stop giving them water altogether, those rats press the lever for a lot longer, right? Because before they already kind of had to press the bar longer or press the lever longer to get water, right? It's not that they were reinforced every single time. They were reinforced occasionally, intermittently, not every time. So their behavior doesn't go down as quickly. We see those rats press the lever for a longer period of time. We also have something called an extinction burst. Okay, so this is another principle of extinction. So the first one was resistance to extinction, how quickly it happens versus how quickly it doesn't happen. And now we have something called an extinction burst. Okay, so when the behavior isn't followed by a reinforcer anymore, there are three things that can happen. The behavior can actually increase, or the intensity can increase. Okay, so what this looks like is the behavior getting worse. Okay, so those rats that they pressed the lever, they got water. They pressed the lever, they got water. They pressed the lever, and every single time they got water. When we put those rats under extinction, which means we don't give them the water anymore, they press the lever, they like press it a lot, and they press it really fast. Now this happens in a really short time period because, like I said, they stop responding after about a minute. But in that minute, they have an extinction burst. They press the lever really hard and they press it super fast and lots of times. Okay. You might also see an occurrence of new behaviors. Okay, where they'll engage in a behavior maybe they've never engaged in before. Maybe they'll hold the lever down for a really long time. Instead of pressing it, they'll hold the lever down. Or maybe the rat will start climbing up the side of the wall and like sniffing above the lever. So behaviors they've never engaged in before. If you are looking for your keys, okay, so let's say I do this all the time now, but I feel like, but let's say there's a specific spot you have your keys. You always hang them. Let's say you have one of those little key racks. Every day you come in and you hang your keys on the rack, and every day when you leave, you put your keys on the key rack. That was always my routine. Then we repainted the house, and I don't hang my keys. We haven't hung the hook back up yet, and so there's nothing for me to put my keys on. Right? So what happens? Well, I don't necessarily always put my keys in the same place anymore. So now when I engage in the behavior of looking for my keys, I used to always go to the wall because that's where my keys were. And even when we didn't have the hook anymore, I would always go to the wall because that's where my keys were. But now that we don't have that hook anymore, sometimes I just put my keys wherever. It's terrible, right? But when that first was happening, I engaged in an extinction burst, which means I would go to the wall and I'm like, where are my keys? Like, I know I put them here on the bookshelf next to the wall where the key, I know they were here. Where are they? Where are they? So first I engage in the extinction burst of an increase in my behavior going to the specific wall. But then new behaviors have to occur because I can't find my keys. So now I have to start looking in places I've never looked before. I might look on the dining room table. I might look in my purse. I might look in my jacket pocket. Maybe I put them on my dresser in my room, right? So when the behavior that was previously reinforced isn't reinforced anymore, you might engaging in new behaviors to get that reinforcement. Okay, I'm engaging in new or novel behaviors of looking for my keys in other places for the reinforcement of actually finding my keys, right? We see this happen with kids a lot when they're having temper tantrums. And we especially see this in the clinical world. Let's say you have a kiddo, and I have experienced this before. So we have a kiddo who, or had a kiddo who would take his clothes off when he didn't want to do a task that he was being asked to do. So if he was being, we were working on math, or we were working on reading, or, working on conversation starters, or whatever it may be for his treatment, what we were working on, when he didn't want to work on it anymore, he would disrobe. In the past, that worked, right? If he was in a classroom with us, he was in a treatment room. But when he's in a classroom, of course, if he does that, the teacher doesn't make, she doesn't want him taking off his clothes in the classroom. So that behavior pays off. But now we're going to put the behavior under extinction, which means when he takes his clothes off, we're not going to let him get out of the task. So if we sit him down at a table and say, we're going to work on math, he starts taking off his clothes. We're not going to let him stop doing math. We're going to say, nope, sit down. And we're going to ignore the fact that he doesn't have clothes on and still make him sit down and do the math. Okay. But what happens? It didn't work, right? A behavior that was previously reinforced, which is him taking off his clothes, didn't work. He didn't get the reinforcement he wanted, which was escaping the unpleasant task. So he decided to engage in some very new and novel behaviors. So now he's running around the room naked. Okay, we're still ignoring, and we're still saying, come to the table to do math. Come to the table to do math, right? We're ignoring the fact that now he's running around the room with no clothes on. Then he starts doing like a little dance right in front of us, like the haha, I'm naked dance, right? We ignore. We don't look at him. We don't talk to him. We come do math, come do math, come do math. So he's going to engage in all these new behaviors to get reinforced. The last thing he decides to do is pee on the therapist, right? So he's run around naked. He's taking all his clothes off. He's done a little naked dance. Nothing is working. She's not letting him get out of doing math. What does he do? He pees on her, right? New novel behaviors to try and get the reinforcement. Now, the problem with this, and we see this a lot in the clinical world, is when the behavior escalates to a point that it's really bad, it's hard to ignore anymore. But what happens is then you reinforce that behavior. So in the instance where the kiddo peed on the therapist, if she had responded to that, thank goodness she did not. She ignored. She just let him pee on her, and that was that. But if she had responded, if at that moment when she got peed on, she had said, okay, forget it, we're not doing that, she just would have reinforced the behavior of being peed on. And now we're not dealing with the behavior of taking off his clothes. We're dealing with the behavior of him peeing on people, because that's the behavior that was reinforced, that paid off. In the future, when he doesn't want to do math, he's just going to pee on someone. He's going to skip everything else because that didn't work. So you can see how that can become really problematic over time. Thank goodness that therapist, she was a great therapist. She did not move from that seat. He peed on her. She sat in it for a while until he finally sat down and did math, and then she got to go home and deal with that. But new novel behaviors can happen. We see it with temper tantrums all the time. Maybe a kid is just screaming, and in the past, mom gave him candy, but we're like, nope, we're putting that under extinction. When he screams, he doesn't get candy anymore. So he's screaming, no candy. So now he starts hitting mom. That doesn't work. Then he starts biting mom, right? And so on and so forth. Eventually, the individual will stop behaving in that way. The tantrum will go away, but it sometimes takes a long time, and you can get these really new, novel, or even aggressive or emotional behaviors that happen. But you don't want to reinforce those, because then in the future, those are the ones that will increase. Okay, so that's the extinction burst. The three main parts of it are: there can be an increase in frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior. So we might see it happen more. You might see new behaviors happen that they've never engaged in before. And you might see emotional or aggressive behaviors happen that also have never happened before. Okay. And one final thing is called spontaneous recovery. So this is when you've gone through extinction, you've gotten rid of a behavior, but then sometime later, after a long period of time, it might occur again in situations where it was reinforced in the past. Okay, so a good example of this is, let's say kiddo, screams and hits and kicks whenever he has to go to the doctor's office. Okay, so we come in, we work with the parent and the child on that. We'll practice going to the doctor's office, right? So we'll tell the child we're going to the doctor's office. When he engages in that behavior, we put it under extinction. You still have to get in the car. You still have to buckle your seatbelt. We're still driving to the doctor's office. Okay. We might not get out and go to the doctor's office though, because maybe there isn't an appointment. We're practicing. And over time, when we say it's time to go to the doctor, that child no longer engages in a tantrum. We successfully put it under extinction. When mom puts him in the car, he doesn't scream, he doesn't kick, he doesn't yell, puts his seatbelt on, he drives, he's calm to the doctor's office, okay? We get to that point, we say, great. A few months goes by, and now mom actually has to take him to a doctor's appointment. So what happens? She says it's time for a doctor's appointment. Child is calm, gets in the car, does everything they're supposed to do, everything's fine. They walk into the doctor's office and boom, temper tantrum. Why? Because that temper tantrum used to occur in that environment, in the doctor's office, right? So because that behavior was reinforced in the past in that environment, in that place, even though we've practiced, right, telling the child we're going to the doctor and we've gotten that behavior under extinction when we say we're going to the doctor, after a long period of time, when we actually go to the doctor's office, the child engages in that behavior again. Okay, and then again, mom would have to put it under extinction, which means she doesn't let him get out of it. She makes him go to the doctor's office and do whatever it is they're going to do. Right. But you do see those behaviors that were extinguished before, or put under extinction. They can happen again when the individual or the organism is placed in a similar or the same situation where that behavior was reinforced before. We also see this with kids who have temper tantrums in stores. We might put it under extinction at a bunch of different stores, but then maybe mom goes to a store that she hasn't been to in a really long time. Maybe it's like a specialty store that she only went to a couple times a year. And even though they've gone to tons of other stores, they've gone to Target and Walmart and Safeway and all these other stores, and the child doesn't engage in temper tantrums, when they get to that store that they haven't been to in a really long time, where a temper tantrum worked before in the past, the child might engage in one then. Again, they're put back in an environment, back in a place where their temper tantrum worked. It paid off in the past. So even though we've put it under extinction, it hasn't happened for a very long time. Because of them being placed in that environment again, they engage in that behavior. That's spontaneous recovery. Okay, I'm going to get into punishment just a little bit. I'm just going to define it real quick, and then I'll save the rest of it for next week. So punishment is when a behavior occurs and it's followed immediately by some consequence, and now the behavior is less likely to happen in the future. It decreases. This is the opposite of reinforcement. Remember, in reinforcement, there's a behavior, it's followed by a consequence, and the behavior increases. For punishment, it decreases. There's a behavior, it's followed by some consequence, and as a result of that consequence, the behavior is less likely to happen in the future. So if a response is followed closely in time, remember we mentioned that with the temporal law, part of this is that they have to happen close in time. So if a response is followed by a negative consequence, and then the frequency or the likelihood of that response decreases in the future, punishment has occurred. Okay, we can definitively say that was a punishment procedure because we saw behavior go down in the future. So essentially, punishment results in behavior decreasing over time. Reinforcement results in behavior increasing over time. Punishment results in a decrease in behavior over time. We'll get into the different types of punishment on Thursday. I'm also going to do a quiz on Thursday in class since we're not going to have the exam this week. I'm going to do your quiz this week instead. So we had the exam scheduled for this week and we had a quiz scheduled for next week on the syllabus. I'm going to flip those. So there's going to be a quiz this week and an exam next week. I will update the syllabus. I'll post an announcement to remind you guys. And I will see you all on Thursday.